My name is Rob Allen. I'm an independent researcher and consultant. Previously, I have been director of the International Centre for Prison Studies at King's College London. I was a member of the Youth Justice Board for 8 years, and I've also been an advisor to the House of Commons Justice Select Committee. Well, I think everybody agrees that providing some help and support to short-term prisoners when they return to the community is something that should be done, and in as much as transforming rehabilitation will introduce that possibility, that is potentially a way of reducing the high reoffending rates for that group. And the idea that a wider range of rehabilitation opportunities should be made available to people on probation, people serving community sentences, people on release from prison, however long the sentence, I think something that's got widespread support. So the basic ideas that the policy is trying to achieve, I think almost everybody would support. The disadvantages seem to me to be pretty weighty ones. I think the whole structure of how the government is planning to do this is probably mistaken at a number of levels. I think the way in which the supervision of the short-term prisoners coming out has been structured in law is extremely risky and will almost certainly lead to more people being breached and returning to custody during the period of liability. They could go into prison for a very short period and then be liable to be returned for breaching supervision for a period up to 12 months. That's a big window. There's the possibility that courts will send people to prison that they otherwise might send on community sentences in order to give them the clang of the prison gate plus some supervision, which is what many magistrates, I think, feel offenders need. So at that level, I think there are some problems. But at the structural level for the way probation services are being envisioned, I think there are some serious problems. The fragmentation, the danger that the local partners on whom rehabilitation so heavily relies may melt away from this sort of scenario. The kind of staff that are going to be doing it for private companies, the sort of, are they going to be qualified? Are they going to be well paid, well motivated? Again, I think the whole thing is of such a scale that it requires very much more careful planning and preparation than the government have given it. The idea is that there will be an opportunity for organizations, charities, voluntary organizations, private companies that are currently excluded from the opportunity to work with offenders and ex-offenders to become involved and to offer a wide range of opportunities that can help them to go straight. I'm sure that may be possible in certain circumstances, but the contracts are going to be given to big outfits who will presumably subcontract aspects of the work to a range of organizations, and we just haven't really seen how that is going to look. Reading a few inspection reports of probation services recently, one is struck by how much alcohol figures in offending. And again, today there's been a call by the police to introduce some new system for dealing with drunks on the street, but the problem is much more deep-rooted than that. Will this new brave new world introduce the possibility for problem drinkers, those whose offending is related to drinking, to be able to access the kinds of services that they need to try and help them? Do we really know what kinds of services work? I'm skeptical, to be honest. I think there's a need for stronger partnerships with the health service that won't necessarily flow from this kind of model. Yes, there are some possibilities for innovative programs like peer mentoring to be scaled up, but I think you've got to remember that these are relatively small scale initiatives. The evidence of evaluations is not as strong as people like to think about the impact that this has on offenders in general. Even the much vaunted St Giles Trust peer mentoring program, there is not a really very strong evidence base that this works as well as we would like. And if you think about scaling this up, and the rhetoric is about this kind of approach being used for every prisoner coming out of every prison across the country, we know that when programs that are small scale are increased in scope and scale, it is difficult to hang on to the effectiveness. And so I'm skeptical about whether the positive impacts that might result from this will actually come about. I'm more worried that for offenders and service users, the stick rather than the carrot, so the risks of being breached, of being sent to prison when they might otherwise not have been, will actually outweigh some of the positives. It might be a Jeremiah view, but I do think that the risks could easily outweigh the benefits of this. Well, I think the jury's out on that. I would much have preferred the probation trusts to have been retained, and for them to have been required or incentivized to do much more to outsource some of their work. Critics would say, well, the probation service has always been rather reluctant to do that, and has tended to hang on to work itself rather than commission or outsource. But there have been examples of trusts that have done extremely innovative work and made a lot of use of small local voluntary organizations and been able to work in that way. And I suppose my instinct is that going down that road and developing the way in which trusts could do that at a local level would be more likely to increase access to the market, as it's called, for these smaller organisations than the model that the government have gone down. There's a report or a suggestion recently that there may not be any, because this is a great big plot to show that actually nothing much works in the rehabilitation of offenders, and why should we be spending public money on it anyway? I think that's I'm not as much of a Jeremiah to think that. I think, you know, it's a cliche, but in a way the structure of these things are a bit of a crossroads. There have been a number of reports saying, for example, the policing and crime commissioners ought to be the bodies locally that assume responsibility not only for the police and perhaps emergency services, but also probation and you know, even local prisons. So it's possible that structurally we will go down that road. It's possible that we will stay with the proposed mix of this public probation system with these range of 21 contract areas, which will all no doubt be different and patchy. How well each of those responds to the need in each of those areas, I think, is the big question. The size of the prison population will obviously determine how much money is available to supervise and help people both within prison and outside prison, because the prisons take the lion's share of the NOM's budget. So I think difficult to know. There were some quite hard line elements in Conservative thinking before the last election, withdrawing benefits from people on community sentences who don't comply, much more stringent systems of earned release from prison and so on. So if the politics goes down that road, we're likely to have a set of services that reflect that, I suppose. There is a more solidaristic approach to all of this, perhaps based on some of the thinking that's coming out of academic work, which is much more about desistance and the need to encourage and stick with offenders over a period of time to help them into the kind of way of thinking about themselves and their lives as law-abiding citizens. And I would like to see models of rehabilitation that encourage that approach. I think that is more likely to come from a locally based model rather than something that we are currently envisaging.